The night air outside the hospital pressed heavy against the windows, but inside the children's ward, silence had taken on its own weight. Only the faint hiss of oxygen tubes and the measured pulse of machines broke it. At the far end of the corridor, under the dim wash of a flickering light, a German shepherd in a black service vest planted his paws squarely on the tiles. His name was Ashur, a veteran canine, yet his composure now was different from the sharp obedience his handlers knew so well. His body trembled, not with fear, but with something more urgent, something stubborn, primal and unyielding. Nurse Dahlia, exhausted from a 14-hour shift, slowed when she noticed him. She had seen dogs stationed before, but never one like this. Ashur refused to move. No coaxing, no command, not even the gentle tug of his handler's hand could shift him. His ears were pinned forward, his chest rising with deep, deliberate breaths as though listening to something no one else could hear. Dahlia felt her throat tighten, the kind of unease that comes not from what you see, but from what you can't. The ward held 7 children, each asleep in narrow beds, small shadows tangled in wires and blankets. Some had lived with illness, so long that quiet nights like these felt like reprieves. Others were still in the uncertain blur of recent accidents. Their breaths were soft, fragile currents that seemed to light for the world. Ashur's gaze swept past each of them, sharp, unblinking, until it fixed on the farthest door, a storage room, unused, its handle catching the pale light. His handler muttered under his breath, irritation hiding the edge of fear. "It's just nerves," he said, but the words rang hollow in the sterile air. Ashur pressed his body low, tail rigid, eyes locked on that door as if it held something invisible but undeniable. Dahlia felt a chill crawl across her arms. She glanced at the children, then at the dog, and for reasons she couldn't name. She didn't argue. The hallway seemed to stretch longer with every passing second. The oxygen hiss grew louder, the flicker of the light slower, like the building itself was holding its breath. Ashur let out a low sound, not a bark, not quite a growl, but something between a warning and a plea. It resonated deep, the kind of sound that cuts through logic and leaves only instinct. Dahlia stepped closer, her shoes whispering across the tiles. She could feel the pulse in her wrist quicken. The storage door hadn't been opened in weeks, maybe months. There should have been nothing there but dust, spare blankets, a broken cot. And yet, the dog would not release his stare. She felt an urge rise in her, unfamiliar but strong, to place her hand on the door handle behind her. One of the children stirred in their sleep, turning over with a soft sigh. The sound carried across the ward, so small and fragile it seemed, to underline the gravity of the moment. Ashur's body stiffened further, paws clawing at the tile, his breath shallow, urgent, pressing toward something unseen. The light above them flickered once more, then steadied. In the pause that followed, the ward felt suspended in a silence so complete it bordered on dread. Nurse Dahlia's hand hovered inches above the handle, caught between reason and instinct, between what she knew and what she suddenly feared, and, in that stillness, with Ashur's gaze burning through the shadows, it became clear, something waited behind that door, something no one had expected, and something the dog would not let be ignored. Dahlia's hand hovered inches from the handle, her breath tight in her chest. The air in the corridor felt charged, as though the sterile walls of the ward were listening. Ashur pressed forward, the leash straining in his handler's grip, claws scraping against the tiles with a sound sharp enough to cut through silence. His ears quivered, locked on the door. Nothing moved beyond it, yet the dog's body insisted. Otherwise, the living sensor of something hidden, something unspoken. Her fingers touched the cold metal, and she hesitated. Every instinct told her this was foolish. Just a door, just a dog too restless for his own good. But her hesitation stretched into stillness, and in that pause she felt the weight of Ashur's certainty. Dogs don't cling to shadows, they protect. No. The handle turned with a reluctant click. The door eased open, carrying the scent of old disinfectant and dust. Darkness pooled inside, the faint shapes of folded sheets and unused cots barely visible. Nothing sinister, nothing strange. Yet Ashur lunged forward, nose lowered, body taut, pulling them into the room as if time itself demanded it. The beam of a flashlight cut through the dark, brushing across stacked supplies and the gray sheen of a gurney. At first the space seemed empty, but then a sound, soft, out of place, the faintest rattle, like air being drawn through a throat too tight. Dahlia froze, her light jerking toward the source on the far corner. Half concealed beneath a canvas sheet lay a figure, small, trembling, their face pale in the beam, a boy, no older than 9. His lips were parted, gasping for air, but no voice came out, only that hollow, rattling pull. Ashur wind low, his body pressed close to the child as though to shield him. The handler's breath caught, his earlier irritation burning away, into something raw. Dahlia dropped to her knees, pulling the sheet back with shaking hands. The boy's skin was clammy, his eyes rolled weakly, searching without focus. This was not a child from the ward. This was someone no one knew was here. For a moment, the room was silent but for the boy's fragile gasps. Then the overhead pipes groaned, the building's breath mingling with his. Dahlia's pulse hammered in her ears. How had he come here, and how long had he been hidden? Her voice broke the silence, soft but urgent. Call the doctor now. The handler fumbled for his radio, his hands clumsy with shock. Ashur stayed pressed against the boy, his warm breath steady, grounding. The dog's tail trembled with a restless beat, not of fear but of insistence. He had not brought them here for nothing. Dahlia's eyes flicked to the doorway, to the shadowed ward beyond. 7 children slept there, unaware of what had been found. She felt the weight of them in her chest. 7 small lives balanced against it, the one now gasping in her hands. The air in the room was thin, and every breath felt stolen. The boy's hand twitched against her sleeve, cold and fragile. She wrapped her fingers around his without thinking, grounding him the way Ashur grounded them all. Beneath the canvas, the floor was damp, as though something had leaked long before anyone noticed. A smell rose with it, metallic, sour, faint but unsettling. Ashur's ears flicked toward the ceiling, then back to the boy, as though torn between warnings. Dahlia followed his gaze. The pipes above groaned again, a low moan rolling down the corridor. A draft pressed against the doorframe, carrying with it the faintest chill. The handler's voice came sharp through the radio. Emergency, storage ward. We need immediate. His words cut short as the lights flickered once more, plunging them into brief darkness before humming back to life. Dahlia pulled the boy gently into her lap, her breath steady but shallow. Around her, the silence pressed heavier, as if the hospital itself resisted what had been uncovered. Ashur sat rigid, gaze shifting from the child to the corridor, body a bridge between discovery and something still unseen. The boy's breath rasped louder, shallow tides struggling against an invisible weight. His eyes flickered open, darting toward the door with sudden fear, as if he knew something was near. Dahlia followed his gaze into the hall, her chest tightening. The corridor stretched empty, silent, but not still. Dahlia's hand lingered above the handle, trembling not from weakness but from the strange certainty that once she touched it, the quiet of the ward would never be the same. Ashur pressed closer, his shoulder brushing her leg, a steady weight urging her forward. The silence of the children behind them felt like a fragile shield, as though every breath in that room hung on the next movement of her hand. The door was cold beneath her palm. It had no right to be. The building's heating reached every corner. Yet here the metal seemed to draw heat from her skin. She glanced once at the handler, who stood rigid, his lips pressed into a thin line. He didn't speak, but his expression carried a silent warning. Some doors are better left unopened. Still Ashur's low rumble deepened, his tail rigid, body quivering with tension that was almost unbearable. He was not asking anymore, he was commanding. She turned the handle. The hinges groaned as the door shifted open by inches, enough for stale air to seep out, carrying the faint scent of damp concrete and something metallic, faint but undeniable. Ashur surged forward, forcing the door wider, his claws scratching against the threshold. He did not leap inside but stopped abruptly at the line where darkness met the light of the corridor, his body rigid as stone. His head tilted, ears flicking, and then he froze in an unshakable point. The handler cursed under his breath, tugging the leash, but Ashur's weight anchored him like a rooted tree. Dahlia leaned in just enough to peer through the narrow opening. At first, she saw nothing but shadows curling around stacks of folded linens and rusted equipment. Then, between the shapes, something shifted. Not a sound, not a figure, just a movement of shadow, too deliberate to be imagined. The air grew colder, Ashur's breathing changed. No longer the shallow urgency of alarm but the sharp pull of focus, like a predator that has found its mark. Dahlia's own chest tightened. She wanted to retreat, to close the door, yet she could not. Behind her, the children lay unaware, their safety as fragile as the glass of the ward's windows. Instinct told her that whatever waited here was not meant to stay hidden. Then came the sound. It was small, almost fragile, as if the dark itself had exhaled. A faint shuffle, a weight shifted against the floor. Dahlia's heart jolted as she saw. Nothing clear, only the impression of someone crouched in the farthest corner. Ashur's body lowered, his throat releasing a deep note that vibrated through the tiles. Not anger, not fear. A sound of warning, layered with something else. Urgency. The handler finally stepped forward, but his confidence faltered. He had seen this dog in fires, in bomb sites, in places where men's nerves snapped under the weight of what they faced. Never once had Ashur's resolve broken. And now, in a hospital corridor that should have been safe, the dog had drawn the line that even the handler hesitated to cross. Dahlia felt her own voice escape in a whisper she hadn't planned. There's someone in there. The words hung in the stale air, heavier than they had any right to be. The handler's jaw tightened. He flicked a glance toward the ward, 7 small bodies, each vulnerable, each under his watch. His decision balanced between doubt and trust, between ignoring instinct and heeding it. The silence deepened, as if the entire building leaned in to listen. Outside, wind pressed faintly against the windows, a low moan that mirrored the unease. Inside, the fluorescent light above them flickered again, casting momentary shadows that distorted the shape in the corner, making it seem larger, nearer, and then gone again. Ashur's body trembled, his eyes locked on the unseen. The leash strained, every muscle alive with tension, but he did not lunge. He waited, as if knowing that whatever truth lay beyond the threshold was not his to reveal. It would have to step forward on its own, and then, from the darkness, came a sound too soft to mistake, the sharp, shallow breath of someone trying not to be heard. Dahlia's hand lingered inches from the handle, her breath shallow in her chest. The hallway seemed to lean in around her, its stillness pressing down like a weight. Ashure's body was taut, his claws scraping softly against the tile, his gaze never wavering from the door. The machine hum behind them carried on, steady but fragile, as if even the air in the children's ward was waiting for what came next. She closed her fingers around the cold metal. It felt too quiet, too deliberate. Something in her spine resisted, telling her she was about to step into something not yet meant for her. Before she could turn the handle, Ashure surged forward with a low, guttural bark that seemed to shatter the silence. The children stirred, whimpering in their sleep, and Dahlia's heart jolted. The handler swore under his breath, his face tight, with unease, but still he said nothing to stop her. The door creaked when it opened. Not much, just a fraction, but enough for a stale gust of air to bleed out, carrying with it the faintest trace of chemicals, sharp and metallic. Dahlia's stomach turned. The storage room had no reason to smell like that. Ashure pushed harder, muscles straining against the leash, his bark breaking into short, frantic bursts. The sound was raw, not aggression, but desperation. Inside, the room was cloaked in shadow. The small window at the top let in only a smear of moonlight, revealing outlines that should have been ordinary, folded blankets. The skeleton of a broken cot, a wheeled cart abandoned to dust, but something in the dark pulsed with wrongness, and it called to Ashure with an insistence that Dahlia could feel in her own chest. She stepped back, pressing her shoulder against the doorframe, unwilling to go farther but unable to shut it. The handler, more cautious now, pulled a flashlight from his belt and cast its beam across the room. The light cut sharply, revealing the clutter, the dust motes drifting like ash, the harmless relics of a neglected space, and then it stopped. Against the back wall, just above the baseboards, something glinted. A vent, its cover warped, metal, twisted slightly as if it had been forced open and jammed shut again. Ashure lunged toward it, the leash dragging his handler forward until the man stumbled. The dog's body slammed against the floor tiles, paws scrabbling toward the vent with a force that bordered on frantic. Dahlia pressed a hand to her mouth, her pulse hammering, as a low sound emanated from behind the vent cover. Not a voice exactly, but a muffled shuffle, a presence too alive to dismiss. The handler froze, his knuckles whitened around the flashlight. "There's someone," he began, but stopped, the words dying in his throat. Ashure wind, his body trembling, every instinct in him focused on that narrow strip of metal. Dahlia took a step closer, her eyes straining against the dimness. For the briefest moment, she thought she heard it too. A faint cough, childlike, dampened by layers of air and steel. She staggered back, colliding with the doorframe. 7 children slept only meters away, their lives fragile enough without hidden dangers breathing through the same walls. Questions flooded her mind. Who could be there? How long had they been hidden? Why had no one noticed? But the only certainty lay in the dog's relentless body pressed against the vent, his entire being insisting on a truth they had all overlooked. Ashure's handler dropped to one knee, fingers brushing over the warped edges of the vent. The metal was cold, its screws stripped, as though tampered with by hurried hands. He swallowed hard, his jaw set with something caught between fear and duty. The beam of his flashlight trembled as he shifted it back, catching Dahlia's face. She looked pale, her eyes wide with a mixture of dread and disbelief. Behind them, the ward seemed to recede into deeper silence. One of the monitors beeped, faintly, its rhythm steady yet fragile, like a reminder of how much hung on their hesitation. Dahlia's throat tightened. She thought of the children's parents, of the promises unspoken in every hospital corridor, promises of safety, of watchfulness, of protection. And here was a dog, alone in his certainty, demanding they see what they had ignored. A soft wind moved outside, brushing faintly against the high windows, rattling a branch against the glass. The sound was small but filled the space with a sense of urgency, as though even nature conspired to break their paralysis. The handler's fingers pressed against the warped vent once more, then curled into a fist. He didn't speak, but the decision was clear in the way his shoulders squared and his body leaned forward. Ashure's ears twitched, his chest vibrating with another whine, as if urging him onward. Dahlia gripped the edge of the door to steady herself. She could feel the weight of the moment, the sense that they were about to pull something into the light that would not easily be returned to shadow. The hospital, the ward, the fragile piece of the children's sleep, all of it hung in the balance of a single act. The handler raised the flashlight again, its beam steady now, and set his other hand against the metal cover. The room seemed to narrow, every sound stripped away until only the faint, muffled breath beyond the vent remained. And then, in the hush of that narrowing silence, the cover shuddered faintly under his touch. The vent cover trembled beneath the handler's hand, the faint vibration carrying into the floor and walls like a secret too long contained. He pressed harder, metal groaning as the last stripped screw gave way. The panel fell loose with a metallic gasp, clattering against the tiles. From the dark cavity behind it came a rush of stale air, sharp with chemicals and damp earth. For a moment, no one moved. Then Ashur surged forward, nose thrust deep into the opening, tail rigid, body alive with certainty. His bark erupted in short bursts, each one striking the silence like a hammer against glass. The flashlight beam cut through the vent's hollow. What it revealed was not the void they expected but movement, a pair of wide, frightened eyes, reflecting the light, then another and another. Small faces, dirt-smudged, pressed close together in the narrow space. Children, 7 of them, cramped and hidden, their bodies curled like forgotten belongings, their breaths shallow but alive. The smallest whimpered, the sound muffled against another's shoulder. Dahlia's knees weakened, her hand finding the doorframe for balance. The weight of disbelief crashed into her that such a thing could exist so close, hidden behind the thin panel of metal, beneath the hum of a hospital ward. The handler froze, his jaw rigid, eyes locked on the impossible truth revealed before them, but Ashur did not hesitate. He pawed at the opening, whining, as if urging them forward, as if every beat of his heart shouted, "See them! Save them!" The next minutes blurred with urgency, calls for help echoing down the corridor, more hands arriving to widen the vent, to reach into the dark and lift fragile bodies into the sterile light. Each child pulled free felt lighter than air, bones fragile under layers of grime, eyes blinking against the sudden brightness. Some wept without sound, others clung fiercely to whoever's arms reached them. The smell of fear and confinement gave way to the sterile scent of antiseptic and the sharpness of human tears. Dahlia crouched, taking one boy into her arms, his small frame pressed against her chest. She could feel the rattle of his breath, the way his fingers clutched at her uniform with a desperation too old for his years. She held him tightly, silently promising what she could not say aloud. Across from her, Ashur stood rigid but watchful, his gaze following each child as though counting, confirming, unwilling to relent until every life had been accounted for. By the time the last child emerged, the room had shifted into something unrecognizable. Nurses and orderlies crowded the corridor, voices sharp with orders and disbelief. But in the center of it all, Ashur sat, chest rising and falling with slow, deliberate breaths. His body had stilled, but his eyes carried the weight of everything they had seen. He seemed older now, not from years but from the truth he alone had refused to ignore. Later, when the chaos ebbed into steady care and the children lay in clean beds under the watch of doctors, Dahlia found herself standing at the far end of the ward. Her gaze drifted to Ashur, who had settled at the threshold as though guarding both the past and what came after. The handler stood beside him, his hand resting gently on the dog's shoulder. For once, no command was given, no leash tugged. The silence between them was enough. The night outside deepened, clouds pulling across the moon, shadows lengthening against the hospital walls. Within, the machines hummed softly, steady now, like a rhythm restored. Dahlia let her eyes linger. On Ashur she thought of how quickly disbelief can blind, how easily instinct can be dismissed until it breaks through with a force that cannot be ignored. She wondered how many other warnings in life went unheard because people refused to see. Ashur's ears twitched at a sound only he noticed, but he did not rise. Instead he lowered his head onto his paws, the weight of the night folding into his body. His eyes remained open, reflecting the pale light of the corridor, not in triumph but in quiet vigilance. He had done what he could, what he must. The ward settled into stillness once more. The children slept, their breathing soft and even now, no longer hidden in darkness but cradled in the fragile security of care. Dahlia stood a moment longer, then drew the curtain of one bed gently closed, her hand lingering against the fabric, as if sealing a promise. Outside, the wind shifted, brushing against the high windows with a sound like a whisper passing through leaves. The weight of the night lifted slightly, as though the world itself had exhaled. Ashur did not move, his body carved in stillness, his presence the final anchor against what might have been lost. And as the last light of the corridor dimmed, the only trace left of the night's revelations was the faint imprint of his paw on the cold tile floor, a mark so ordinary it might be missed, yet carrying the silent weight of 7 lives saved.